darling. Shouldn't you be somewhere more financially appropriate?
The laugh that followed those words was sharp and dismissive, the kind of laugh that has been weaponized in luxury showrooms and country clubs for generations, and it cut through the marble foyer of the Bel Air estate like a champagne flute shattering on travertine. Kathleen Whitford, 51 years old, blonde shoulder-length bob freshly retouched at a salon on Rodeo Drive, beige Chanel-inspired suit pressed to within an inch of its life, stood at the bottom of a double staircase with one hand on her hip and the other holding a tablet displaying a property listing she had no intention of actually showing. In front of her stood a black couple in their late 30s and early 40s. The woman wore an ivory linen pantsuit and a single gold chain. The man wore a navy polo and chinos. They had introduced themselves 20 minutes earlier as Anthony and Olivia Bennett. Kathleen had already forgotten their names. What Kathleen did not know, what she could not have begun to imagine as she stood there laughing at her own joke in front of two assistant valets and a junior agent who had gone very still by the front door, was that within 43 minutes a wire transfer of $50 million would clear the listing brokerage's escrow account, that within 90 minutes the listing broker himself would be screaming at her over the phone from a yacht off Catalina Island, and that within 24 hours she would be unemployed, publicly, and not just from this estate, not just from this brokerage, but from the parent corporation that owned it, fired by name in a board resolution signed by a silent shareholder she had never heard of. The silent shareholder was standing 6 feet in front of her, in the ivory linen suit, watching her laugh. Before we walk through the Beverly Hills boardrooms and Bel Air gates of one of the most spectacular real estate humiliations in recent California history, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments below. We have a community here that stretches across 6 continents, and there is something deeply moving about scrolling through the comments of a story like this one and seeing names of cities you have never visited but where someone, right now, is nodding along to the exact same lesson. And if the opening already has you leaning in, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, because stories about people who refuse to be small in rooms designed to make them feel small, those stories deserve to travel. Now let us rewind. Let us go back to the morning of that showing, 80 minutes before Kathleen Whitford laughed in the Bennett's faces, because to understand the size of what happened in that marble foyer, you have to understand exactly who Anthony and Olivia Bennett were, and exactly how little of that information Kathleen had bothered to gather before deciding she already knew everything she needed to know. The morning had begun, as most mornings began for the Bennetts, in a rented house in Brentwood that they had been using as a temporary base while they searched for a permanent residence on the west side. The house was modest by Brentwood standards, a 4-bedroom mid-century ranch on a flag lot off Kenter Avenue, rented furnished from a film producer who was shooting in Vancouver for 6 months. The Bennetts had been living there for 4 weeks. They had toured 19 properties in that time. They had been treated, by Anthony's quiet count, with active suspicion at 14 of those 19 showings. It was not, Anthony had explained to his wife over coffee that morning, a feeling he was unfamiliar with. He had grown up in a small house in Compton, the youngest of 4 children of a postal carrier and a hospital cafeteria manager. He had earned a full scholarship to Stanford for engineering. He had spent 11 years as a software developer before transitioning to the business side, eventually rising to chief operating officer of a health tech company that had specialized in patient data infrastructure. The company had been acquired 3 years earlier by a larger firm for a sum that, after taxes and the structuring of various trusts, had left Anthony and Olivia personally worth a hair over $400 million. They were, by any conventional measure, wealthy in a way that placed them in a vanishingly small percentile of the American population. But Anthony still drove a 6-year-old SUV. He still wore polos from a department store chain. He still, when meeting strangers, introduced himself simply as Anthony, no title, no company, no particular emphasis. He had learned, decades earlier, that announcing yourself in certain rooms only invited a different kind of disrespect, the kind that pretended to be respect. Olivia had learned the same lessons, but on a different track entirely. Olivia Bennett, born Olivia Marie Carter, had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Inglewood, the only child of a single mother who had worked nights as an emergency room nurse at Centinela Hospital. Her childhood had been shaped by long quiet evenings spent doing homework at the kitchen table while her mother slept in the next room, by the steady drumbeat of her mother's one repeated mantra, which was that an education and a savings account were the only two things in this world that nobody could take away from a black woman, and by a peculiar habit Olivia had developed at the age of 9 of reading the business section of the Los Angeles Times before reading anything else in the paper. By the time she was 12, she could name every chief executive officer of every company in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. By the time she was 15, she had opened her first brokerage account with $300 she had earned tutoring younger students in algebra. By the time she graduated as valedictorian from Inglewood High School, she had grown that account, through patient and unspectacular index fund investing, to a balance that could cover her first year at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business without any assistance from financial aid. She had met Anthony at a Black Professionals in Technology mixer in San Francisco the year she turned 26. She had been working at a private equity firm. He had been a senior engineer at a company most people had not yet heard of. They had married 3 years later in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Sonoma. They had supported each other through every subsequent step, through Anthony's pivot from engineering to operations, through Olivia's slow, deliberate construction of a personal investment portfolio that operated through a network of limited liability companies and trusts in a way that kept her name out of every public-facing record. By the time Anthony's company had been acquired, Olivia's separate portfolio, built independently of his work, had crossed $300 million on its own. The combined balance sheet of the Bennett household, as of that morning in Brentwood, was meaningful enough that both of them had long since stopped tracking it weekly. They had a wealth manager based in Zurich who handled the European exposures, a banker in Dubai who handled the Middle Eastern fund relationships and certain real estate transactions structured through that jurisdiction for tax efficiency, and a legal team in Los Angeles that handled everything domestic. Anthony had spoken to the Dubai banker the previous evening. He had given the banker a heads-up that they intended to make an offer on a property in Bel Air the following day, and that the offer might need to be moved with unusual speed. The banker, a Lebanese woman named Rania who had handled the Bennett's affairs for 6 years, had said only, "Send me the wire instructions when you have them. I will be available all day." The property the Bennetts intended to bid on was located at the top of Stradella Road, a 14,000 square foot contemporary on 3 acres with a panoramic view that swept from downtown Los Angeles all the way to the Pacific. The asking price was $48 million. The property had been on the market for 9 months, which in Bel Air translated to an eternity, and which Anthony's research had suggested was largely the result of the listing agent, a woman named Kathleen Whitford, having developed a reputation among the Bel Air buyers broker community for being difficult, snobbish, and unwilling to engage with offers that did not arrive through what she considered appropriate channels. 2 of the 3 buyers brokers Anthony had quietly consulted had warned him that Kathleen Whitford would not take the showing seriously. The third had simply said, "Good luck." The Bennetts had decided to go anyway. There were several reasons. The first was that the property was, by every objective measure, the right house. The architecture was clean. The land was beautiful. The view was incomparable. The second reason was that Olivia, in her quiet investor capacity, held a meaningful stake in the parent company of Whitford's brokerage. She had acquired the position 3 years earlier, during a period of consolidation in the residential real estate sector when the parent corporation had needed a recapitalization. Her stake was held through one of her limited liability companies and was passive, but it was sizable enough that her name appeared, in 12-point font, on a single page of a regulatory filing that Kathleen Whitford had never read and never would have thought to read. The third reason was simpler. Anthony and Olivia had decided, during a long conversation the previous night, that they were tired. They were tired of being treated, in showroom after showroom, like intruders. They had decided that on this morning, in this house, they were going to find out exactly how the showing went, and they were going to respond accordingly. They got dressed at 7:30. Olivia chose the ivory linen suit deliberately. Anthony chose the navy polo for the same reason. They left for Bel Air at 9:15. The drive from Brentwood up through the winding hillside roads of Bel Air took the Bennetts 22 minutes in light Tuesday morning traffic. Anthony drove. He had always driven on showings, partly because he liked the time alone with Olivia in the car before walking into a high-pressure environment, and partly because driving allowed him to mentally prepare for whatever the next house would bring. They had not spoken much during the drive. They had listened to a jazz station Anthony favored, an instrumental piano piece by Ahmad Jamal filling the cabin as the boulevard climbed past wrought iron gates and security cameras and the kind of hedges that grew tall enough to swallow the sun. Olivia had looked out the window. She had thought about her mother, who had died 4 years earlier and who had never, in her entire life, set foot inside a house priced above $800,000. She had thought about how strange it was that the daughter of a night shift nurse from Inglewood was about to consider purchasing a home for $48 million. She had thought about the fact that she had earned every dollar of it, and that this fact would not, in any way, shape, or form, prevent the next hour from playing out in exactly the way the buyer's brokers had predicted. The estate at the top of Stradella Road was set behind a long, gently curving driveway lined with Italian cypress trees. The driveway terminated in a circular motor court paved with hand-set Belgian cobblestones. As Anthony eased their SUV up the final stretch, 2 valets in white polos stepped forward, one of them already raising his phone to take a discreet photograph of the vehicle. The Bennetts had grown used to that as well. The valet who approached the driver's side wore a small earpiece. He glanced at the SUV, glanced at Anthony, and let his expression slide into something just barely north of polite. "Are you here for a showing, sir?" "Yes," Anthony said. "Bennett. We have a 10 o'clock with Kathleen Whitford." The valet glanced at his earpiece. He spoke into it briefly. There was a pause. Then he stepped back and gestured, with a smoothness that did not quite hide the hesitation that had preceded it, toward an open spot in the motor court. "Please come right in, sir. Ms. Whitford is inside." Anthony parked. He killed the engine. He turned to Olivia in the passenger seat. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, the kind of silent communication that 15 years of marriage had refined into a wordless protocol. "You ready?" he asked. "I'm ready," she said. They got out of the car. The front doors of the estate were 16 feet tall, hand-carved walnut with brushed bronze handles, set into a portico framed by limestone columns. As the Bennetts approached, the doors swung open from the inside, revealing a marble foyer that opened onto a pair of curving staircases and, beyond them, a wall of glass that framed an infinity pool and the sweep of the Los Angeles basin all the way to the ocean. The foyer alone was larger than the apartment Olivia had grown up in. The chandelier suspended from the 30-foot ceiling had been imported from a workshop in Murano, Italy, according to the listing materials Anthony had reviewed. Standing in the foyer were 3 people. A young woman in her mid-20s, black, wearing a charcoal pantsuit and holding a leather portfolio, who introduced herself a moment later as Sofia Reyes, junior agent on the listing team. A man in his 50s with a gray ponytail, who appeared to be a property manager of some kind, lingering near the kitchen entrance. And in the center of the foyer, positioned at the foot of the left staircase with the practiced angle of someone who had been informed of the buyer's arrival and had arranged herself to be discovered, Kathleen Whitford. Kathleen looked up from her tablet as the Bennetts crossed the threshold. Her eyes did the small, almost imperceptible flicker that Olivia had come to recognize over the years, the brief recalibration that happened when a particular kind of person registered that the bodies entering their space were not the bodies they had been expecting. The flicker lasted perhaps a tenth of a second. It was followed by a smile that was thin and stretched and entirely professional in the way that a paper plate is entirely professional, which is to say it was designed to be discarded the moment it stopped being useful. "Hello," Kathleen said, her voice projecting across the foyer with the carrying quality of someone accustomed to large rooms. "I'm Kathleen Whitford with Crestmont Luxury Properties." "And you are?" "Anthony Bennett. This is my wife Olivia. We had a 10 o'clock confirmed." "Did we?" Kathleen glanced at her tablet, performing a search that her body language suggested she had not actually performed. "Oh. Right. The Bennetts. She did not move from her position at the foot of the staircase. Well. Come in, I suppose. Sophia Reyes, the young agent, stepped forward instead and extended her hand. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, it's a pleasure. May I get you some water before we start? She had, Olivia noticed immediately, kind eyes. Olivia accepted the offer of water with a small nod and a thank you that she made certain was warm enough for Sophia to feel the difference between how she had just been spoken to and how she was now being spoken to. Sophia disappeared briefly toward the kitchen wing, returning a moment later with 2 chilled bottles of sparkling water from a brand the Bennetts recognized as one stocked exclusively at properties priced above $30 million. She handed them over with the quiet confidence of someone who had been trained to anticipate a specific class of guest, and who, despite the obvious indifference of her senior colleague, intended to deliver that level of service to the people in front of her regardless of what Kathleen had clearly already decided about them. Kathleen, meanwhile, had already turned her back and begun walking. All right, let's just do the quick version, she called over her shoulder, her tone making clear that she considered any longer version a waste of everyone's morning. This is the foyer, obviously. 20-foot ceiling. Murano chandelier. Kitchen is to the right. We'll loop through, I'll show you the pool, and then we can wrap up. Anthony exchanged a glance with Olivia. The glance contained a small, precise message. Stay calm. Let her run. They followed. The kitchen, when they reached it, was a vast pale expanse of Calacatta marble and brass fixtures, with a Lacanche range imported from France and a pantry the size of most studio apartments. Kathleen breezed through it in under 90 seconds, gesturing vaguely at appliances without naming any of them, skipping entirely the wine cellar that the listing materials described as containing custom climate-controlled storage for 1,600 bottles. Anthony, who had read the listing materials in detail the previous evening, noted the omission. Olivia noted it as well. In the great room, Kathleen actually pulled out her phone. She scrolled through it for several seconds while standing in front of a wall of glass that framed one of the most spectacular views in the city, then looked up and said, "So this is the great room. Obviously the views speak for themselves." She did not invite the Bennetts to step closer to the glass. She did not point out the fireplace, which had been carved from a single block of travertine quarried in Tivoli. She did not mention that the floors were reclaimed French oak from a dismantled chateau in the Loire Valley, a detail the listing materials emphasized at length. Anthony walked to the glass on his own. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at the view. Olivia joined him. Behind them, Kathleen sighed audibly. The sigh was a small one, but she made certain it was loud enough to carry. She then turned to Sophia, who was standing politely a few feet away with her portfolio tucked under her arm, and spoke to her in a voice that was pitched precisely to be overheard. "Sophia, sweetie, after this we've got the showing at 2:30 up in Holmby Hills with the actual buyers. The ones from Singapore. Make sure the catering team is set up by 1:45, because those people are serious. They actually wired the proof of funds last week." Sophia's expression did not change. But her eyes, very briefly, closed. Anthony heard every word. He did not turn around. He continued to look at the view. Olivia placed her hand gently on his forearm. The gesture meant, "I heard her, and I am holding the line, and we are still doing this on our terms." Kathleen continued. "I mean, look, Sophia, we have to take every showing seriously, of course, but you know how it is. People come up here, they want to see the houses, it's like a free tour, you know. Like, we're basically running a museum on Tuesdays." She laughed at her own observation. The laugh was light and casual and pitched, again, to Carrie. "We should start charging admission." Sophia said nothing. She glanced toward the Bennetts, and the apology in her eyes was so visible that Olivia felt something tighten briefly in her chest. Olivia gave Sophia a small, almost imperceptible smile that contained the message, "This is not your fault, and we see you." Kathleen, having delivered her commentary, gestured impatiently toward the staircase. "All right, let's loop upstairs quickly so we can wrap. I want to get you back to your day. The tour upstairs lasted 9 minutes. Kathleen showed 3 of the 7 bedrooms, skipped the primary suite entirely, and waved her hand toward a closed set of double doors with the words, "Primary's back there, but the housekeeper is in there right now, so we'll skip it." It was not true. There was no housekeeper. Anthony could see, through a gap in the doors, that the room was empty and beautifully made up. He said nothing. He filed the moment away. He had been filing moments away all morning. When they returned to the foyer, Kathleen actually checked her watch. "Well," she said, "I think you've gotten a good sense." "Honey," she said, turning to Olivia for the first time and smiling that thin paper smile, "why don't you just stick to your tax bracket?" The laugh that followed those words landed in the marble foyer like a shattered champagne flute. Sophia visibly flinched. Anthony Bennett, very calmly, reached into his pocket for his phone. The phone in Anthony's hand was a 5-year-old model with a small scuff along the lower edge. He had owned it since the year before the acquisition, and he had declined every opportunity in the intervening years to upgrade it, partly because it still worked perfectly, and partly because there was a private satisfaction in watching strangers register, again and again, that the man in front of them did not require their estimation of his net worth to be reflected back at him through the casing of his electronics. He unlocked the phone with his thumb. He stepped, with deliberate calm, 3 paces away from the group, toward the open archway that led to a small library off the foyer. He did not raise his voice. He did not announce what he was doing. He simply turned his back, lifted the phone to his ear, and waited for Rania, his banker in Dubai, to pick up. She picked up on the second ring. It was approximately 9 in the evening in Dubai, and Rania was, as she had promised, available. "Anthony. Tell me where we are." 48 million asking. "I'm going to wire 50 as a non-refundable proof of intent into the listing brokerage's escrow account. I'd like it to clear within the hour. Can you make that happen?" "Of course. Send me the brokerage's escrow details and I will move the funds in the next 10 minutes. "Sophia," Anthony said, turning slightly toward the foyer without raising his voice. "Could you come here for a moment, please?" Sophia, who had been standing several feet from Kathleen with the careful neutrality of a junior agent who had learned early not to react visibly to anything her senior said in front of clients, looked up. She walked over. Anthony covered the phone briefly and spoke to her in a voice that was low and even. "Sophia, I need the escrow wire instructions for the listing brokerage, please. The full routing, account number, intermediary bank, and SWIFT code if it's an international correspondent." Sophia blinked once. She had been a licensed agent for 11 months. She had attended exactly 1 closing of a property valued above $10 million. She had never, in those 11 months, been asked for escrow wire instructions by a buyer standing in the foyer of the property they were intending to purchase. But she had been raised by a mother who had been a paralegal for 32 years at a downtown Los Angeles firm, and she had absorbed, by osmosis, the particular skill of moving competently through unexpected procedural moments. "Yes, sir. Give me 60 seconds. She walked briskly toward a small console table at the edge of the foyer, opened her leather portfolio, extracted a printed dossier, and flipped to a page near the back that contained the brokerage's standard escrow instructions for high-value transactions. She copied the information onto a fresh sheet of letterhead, signed and dated it as a junior agent of record, and handed it to Anthony with both hands. "Here you are, Mr. Bennett." "Thank you, Sophia." He turned back to the phone. He read the wire instructions to Rania in a quiet, clear voice, repeating each digit twice. Rania confirmed each line back to him. The entire exchange took approximately 4 minutes. Across the foyer, Kathleen Whitford had begun to register that something unusual was occurring. She had assumed, when Anthony had first stepped away with his phone, that he was calling an Uber, or perhaps a friend, or perhaps simply pretending to take a call as a face-saving exit from a tour he had clearly been embarrassed to take. She had used the intervening minutes to scroll through her own phone, occasionally glancing up with the bored expression of someone waiting for a guest to leave. But the longer Anthony stayed on his call, and the more attentively Sophia stood beside him, and the more quietly and precisely the conversation seemed to be unfolding, the more Kathleen's certainty began, almost imperceptibly, to fray. She walked over. She did not introduce her arrival. She simply inserted herself into the small space between Anthony and the library archway, planted her hand on her hip, and said, in a voice loud enough to interrupt his call, "Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to wrap up. We have other appointments, and I really can't have you taking personal calls in a listed property." Anthony did not look at her. He held up one finger in the universal gesture of one moment, please, and continued speaking quietly to Rania. Kathleen's mouth tightened. She turned to Sophia. "Sophia, please ask the gentleman to leave the property." Sophia, who had now seen the wire instructions document in Anthony's hand and who had begun, in real time, to suspect what was unfolding, did not move. She simply said, "I think it would be best if we let Mr. Bennett finish his call, Kathleen." Kathleen's head snapped toward her. "Excuse me." Anthony hung up. He turned around. He smiled, briefly, at Sophia. "Thank you, Sophia. The wire is moving now. It should clear in your brokerage's escrow account within the next 30 to 40 minutes. He turned to Kathleen. "Ms. Whitford, I'd like to make an offer on the property. 50 million, all cash, close in 14 days, no contingencies." Kathleen's mouth opened. It did not, immediately, close. For approximately 7 seconds, Kathleen Whitford did not speak. She stared at Anthony Bennett with the expression of a person whose internal narrative had just collided, at speed, with a piece of information that the narrative had not been built to accommodate. Her mouth, which had opened to deliver some version of a polite dismissal, remained slightly parted. Her hand, which had been planted on her hip in a posture of irritated authority, slowly dropped to her side. Her eyes performed a small, telltale flicker downward to Anthony's polo, then to his chinos, then to the scuffed phone still in his hand, and then back up to his face, as if she were trying to physically reconcile the math of what she was looking at with the words that had just been spoken. When she finally found her voice, it came out an octave higher than her previous register. "Sir. I'm sorry, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This property is listed at $48 million. It is not a property that we can entertain casual offers on. We require proof of funds, we require a pre-qualification letter from a recognized institution, we require, the proof of funds will be in your brokerage's escrow account within the hour," Anthony said. His tone was even and unhurried, the tone of a man who had spent 2 decades in boardrooms negotiating acquisitions of considerably greater complexity than the one currently in front of him. "I've just initiated a $50 million wire from my private banking relationship in Dubai. The wire is non-refundable. It is structured as a proof of intent deposit that will convert to the purchase price upon execution of a standard purchase agreement. My counsel will have a draft agreement to your brokerage by the end of business today." Kathleen's hand returned to her hip, but the gesture had lost its earlier conviction. She glanced toward Sophia, then toward the front doors, then back at Anthony, with the dawning unease of someone beginning to suspect that they had walked, on autopilot, into a conversation that was now several exits past the off-ramp they had intended to take. "Sir, I am going to need to verify all of this with my listing broker before we can proceed in any way." "That seems entirely reasonable," Anthony replied. "I would suggest you call him now." Kathleen did not call him now. Instead, she made a small gesture toward the kitchen wing, the kind of gesture that seemed to suggest she would prefer to handle the call privately, and walked briskly out of the foyer with her phone already pressed to her ear. Anthony watched her go. He turned to Olivia, who had been standing a few feet behind him throughout the conversation with her sparkling water in hand, observing the entire exchange with the expression of a woman watching a play she had read the script for in advance. "Are we still all right?" he asked her quietly. "We're fine," she said. "Take your time." Sophia, who had remained close, looked at the Bennetts with an expression that was somewhere between bewilderment, professional alertness, and barely contained amazement. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly, "I want you to know that I am happy to assist you in whatever capacity you need. I will pull the comparable sales, I will draft any preliminary documentation, I will coordinate with your counsel directly. Whatever would be most helpful." "Sophia," Anthony replied, his voice warm now in a way it had not been all morning, "you are going to be more involved in this transaction than you currently realize. We will get to that in a few minutes." Sophia did not entirely understand what he meant. She nodded anyway. In the kitchen, Kathleen was on the phone with the listing broker, a man named David Coltrane who was, at that precise moment, sitting on the rear sundeck of a 112-foot motor yacht anchored a quarter-mile off the coast of Catalina Island, drinking a Bloody Mary and watching his teenage daughter attempt to wakeboard. He answered the phone in the relaxed tone of a man who had not anticipated the call matching. "Kathleen. What's going on?" "David, I need you to verify something for me immediately. I have a couple in the foyer of the Stradella property who claim to be wiring $50 million into our escrow account within the hour." "I think it's what did you just say?" "I said, I have a couple here who," Kathleen. "Stop talking. Get off the phone. Open your laptop. Refresh the escrow portal. Now." Kathleen, momentarily startled by the change in her broker's voice, stepped over to the kitchen island and opened the laptop she had set down there earlier. She pulled up the escrow management portal. She refreshed it. A new pending wire transfer had appeared in the Stradella Properties escrow line, marked with an originating institution in Dubai and a notation field that read, in clean block letters, Bennett, N.O., non-refundable proof of intent, $50 million. The status was marked in yellow. Pending verification. Arrival estimated 31 minutes. Kathleen stared at the screen. David Coltrane, 8 nautical miles offshore, set his Bloody Mary down with the careful slowness of a man who had just understood that his entire afternoon had changed. "Kathleen," he said. "Whatever you are doing right now. Stop. Walk back into that foyer. And do not, under any circumstances, say another word to those buyers until I get there." He was already standing. David Coltrane was 47 years old, the founder and managing broker of Crestmont Luxury Properties, and a man who had spent 22 years building a reputation in Bel Air real estate that depended on a very specific kind of careful choreography. He did not lose his composure publicly. He did not raise his voice on phone calls. He did not, generally, stand up suddenly from a sundeck chair on his own yacht. But on this particular Tuesday morning, having just refreshed the escrow portal on the laptop his captain had handed him moments after he ended the call with Kathleen, he did all 3 of those things in rapid succession. He shouted for his captain. He instructed the man to bring the tender around and prepare for an immediate return to Marina del Rey. He apologized to his daughter, who was now sitting on the swim platform with the wakeboard across her knees, and informed her that they would have to cut the day short. He went below deck. He changed out of his swim trunks into a pair of slacks and a button-down he kept in the master cabin for exactly these kinds of unexpected pivots. He called his transaction coordinator and told her to begin pulling every comparable sale in Bel Air priced above $35 million from the past 18 months. He called his attorney and told him to clear his calendar for the rest of the day. And then, because he had managed Kathleen Whitford for 9 years and had a fairly precise mental model of exactly how she conducted herself in showings, he called Kathleen back. She picked up on the first ring. "David, listen, I think we need to be very careful here, because I'm not entirely sure these people are, Kathleen. Are you currently with the buyers?" I stepped into the kitchen. "Where are they right now?" "They're in the foyer with Sophia." "Good. I want you to listen to me very carefully, because I need you to do exactly 3 things, in this order, and then I need you to stop talking until I get to the property. The first thing is, you are going to walk back into that foyer. The second thing is, you are going to apologize to Mr. and Mrs. Bennett for any inconvenience the morning has caused them. The third thing is, you are going to offer them anything they want, anything at all, until I arrive. Do you understand me? Kathleen, who was now experiencing the particular flavor of nausea that arrives when a successful career suddenly reveals itself to be standing on much thinner ice than its owner had assumed, made a small sound of acknowledgement. Kathleen. Did the buyers behave in any way during the showing that might have suggested they were not serious? A pause. Kathleen. David, look, you know how it is, I assumed, Kathleen. Did you make any comments? About the buyers. That you would not want repeated in front of me. A longer pause. David, I might have made a small remark, but it was nothing, it was just professional banter with Sophia, and I'm sure, Kathleen. I am going to hang up now. I will be at the property in approximately 70 minutes. When I arrive, I expect to find Mr. and Mrs. Bennett comfortable, well treated, and still interested in the property. If I do not, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. Am I clear? You're clear. Walk back to the foyer. Now. The line went dead. Kathleen stood for a moment in the vast empty kitchen, holding her phone, looking down at the laptop screen where the pending wire transfer notation still glowed in its small yellow rectangle. She closed the laptop. She closed her eyes. She took a single slow breath. She opened her eyes. She arranged her face into what she believed was a friendly, professional, contrite expression. The expression was not particularly convincing, but it was the best she could manage on short notice. She walked back to the foyer. The Bennetts were still standing there, in the same configuration as before, with Sophia close at hand. Anthony was scrolling calmly through something on his phone. Olivia was looking up at the Murano chandelier with the appraising expression of a woman doing mental arithmetic about whether she would keep it or replace it. Neither of them reacted as Kathleen approached. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, Kathleen began, her voice now several registers softer than it had been 20 minutes earlier, I want to begin by apologizing for any miscommunication earlier in our showing. It is sometimes difficult, in this market, to immediately recognize the seriousness of every buyer, and I'm afraid I may have been less attentive than I should have been. I am very sorry. Anthony lowered his phone. He looked at Kathleen for a long moment. Ms. Whitford, he said, his voice quiet and absolutely level, I appreciate the apology. But I would like to be very direct with you about what is going to happen next, so that there are no further misunderstandings. Kathleen waited. Olivia, beside him, had finally taken her eyes off the chandelier. She was now looking at Kathleen. My wife and I are going to purchase this property, Anthony said. His tone had not risen, had not sharpened, had not acquired any of the satisfied edge that the moment might have invited from a less disciplined man. It was simply the calm, almost gentle voice of someone explaining a foregone conclusion. We are going to close in 14 days. We are going to pay the full asking price plus the $2 million premium I have already wired into your brokerage's escrow account. And when this transaction closes, the commission on the buyer's side, which I understand is 2.5% of the purchase price, will not be paid to you, Ms. Whitford. Kathleen's expression did not change. She had braced for it. The commission, Anthony continued, will be paid in full to Sophia Reyes, who has, throughout the morning, conducted herself with the professionalism, courtesy, and competence that I would expect from a senior agent at a brokerage of this caliber. Ms. Reyes will be the agent of record on this transaction. My counsel will draft the paperwork accordingly, and we will require your brokerage's written confirmation of the reassignment before we proceed to closing. Sophia, standing 4 feet away, had gone perfectly still. The mathematics of what she had just heard were not, in that first moment, fully available to her. 2.5% of $50 million was $1,250,000. The standard junior split at Crestmont Luxury Properties on a commission of that size, after the brokerage's percentage and the team lead's override, would typically have netted Sophia somewhere in the neighborhood of $140,000. But Anthony had specified the full commission, paid to her, not to the team. And David Coltrane, when he arrived at the property 80 minutes later and was presented with the Bennetts' terms, would not be in any position to negotiate the structure. The commission, in its entirety, would land in Sofia Reyes's account approximately 17 days later. After taxes, after the brokerage's mandatory desk fee, after the small percentage carved out for transaction coordination, Sofia would clear, on this single transaction, just over $1,400,000. She did not yet know the precise number. She knew, only, that something extraordinary had just happened to her, and that she was being trusted to remain professional through the rest of it. She remained professional. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice steady, "I am honored. I will represent your interests with the highest level of care and confidentiality." "I know you will," Anthony replied. "That's why we're asking." Kathleen was, by this point, no longer attempting to maintain her earlier posture. Her hand had returned to her side. Her shoulders had rounded slightly. Her face had gone pale beneath her foundation. She understood, with the clarity that only complete professional disaster provides, that the morning had crossed a line that no apology, no contrition, no last-minute pivot to friendliness was going to walk back. She was going to lose this commission. She was going to lose her standing on the listing team. She was, at minimum, going to be sidelined within Crestmont Luxury Properties for the foreseeable future. What she did not yet know, what she could not yet have begun to guess, was that the loss of the commission and the loss of standing within Crestmont would be, by a considerable margin, the smallest of the consequences awaiting her. That information was about to be delivered. Olivia Bennett, who had not spoken throughout the entire exchange, stepped forward for the first time. She placed her sparkling water bottle on the small console table at the edge of the foyer. She straightened the cuff of her ivory linen blazer. She fixed Kathleen with a gaze that was neither hostile nor warm, but rather possessed the quiet evaluative steadiness of a person who had spent 20 years reading balance sheets and making decisions about whether companies and the people within them deserved continued investment. "Ms. Whitford," she said, "may I ask you a question?" Kathleen managed a small nod. "Are you familiar with Marigold Capital Partners?" The name did not, immediately, register. Kathleen's brow furrowed slightly. She searched her memory for a client, a former colleague, a brokerage she might have crossed paths with at some point. Nothing came up. "I'm not sure I am," Kathleen said. Marigold Capital Partners, Olivia continued in the same level tone, is a private investment vehicle that holds, among other positions, a controlling interest in Heritage Residential Group. Heritage Residential Group is the parent corporation of Crestmont Luxury Properties. Marigold acquired its position in Heritage 3 years ago during the recapitalization. The acquisition was structured through a series of limited liability companies in order to keep the ultimate beneficial ownership confidential. I am the sole general partner of Marigold Capital Partners. I am, in functional terms, the majority owner of the company that signs your paychecks. The marble foyer went completely silent. Even Sophia, who had been absorbing the morning with admirable composure, audibly inhaled. Kathleen stared at Olivia. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Olivia did not blink. "I think," she said quietly, "we have a great deal to discuss." David Coltrane arrived at the Stradella property at 12:43 in the afternoon, having broken several traffic laws on the drive up from Marina del Rey and having spent most of that drive on the phone with his attorney, his transaction coordinator, and, briefly, his wife, to whom he had said only, "I may be home very late, and I may be in a different mood than usual." He pulled into the cobblestone motor court, handed his keys to the valet, and walked through the open double doors into a foyer that was, by then, configured very differently than the one Kathleen Whitford had attempted to control 3 hours earlier. The Bennetts were seated on a long pale linen sofa in the great room, drinking espresso that Sophia had prepared from the kitchen's built-in machine, reviewing a preliminary purchase agreement that Anthony's counsel had emailed over 20 minutes earlier. Sophia was seated in an armchair across from them, taking notes on a fresh legal pad, her posture upright and alert. Kathleen was standing alone near the staircase, arms crossed, face drained of color, having been politely but firmly excluded from the working conversation. She had not been asked to leave the property. She had simply been allowed to stand, in plain view, and watch the transaction unfold around her. David took the room in within 4 seconds. He walked directly to the sofa. He introduced himself to Anthony and Olivia with a warmth that was practiced but, in this particular case, also genuine, because David Coltrane had not built a 22-year career in luxury real estate by being unable to recognize, in the first 30 seconds of meeting them, the kind of clients the Bennetts were. He apologized, comprehensively and without qualifier, for the conduct of his agent earlier in the morning. He confirmed, in writing, the reassignment of the buyer's commission to Sophia Reyes. He presented the Bennetts with a revised package that included a complimentary 1-year membership to a private concierge service the brokerage maintained for its highest-tier clients, which Olivia accepted with the same small, gracious smile she had been deploying all morning, and which Anthony, with very mild amusement, declined. The wire cleared at 1:17 in the afternoon. The escrow officer at the brokerage emailed confirmation. The status indicator in the portal turned from yellow to green. Kathleen, who was still standing near the staircase, watched her phone flash with the automated notification and felt something inside her chest do a small, final, irreversible thing. By 3 in the afternoon, the preliminary purchase agreement had been signed by both parties, with closing scheduled for 14 days out. By 4, the Bennetts were back in their SUV heading down the hill, Anthony driving, Olivia in the passenger seat, the same Ahmad Jamal piano piece playing softly through the cabin. They did not speak for several minutes. They simply listened, and watched the eucalyptus trees flicker past the windows, and let the morning settle into the specific shape it would hold in their memory for the rest of their lives. "You all right?" Anthony asked finally. "I'm all right," Olivia said. "You handled her beautifully." "I should have done it years ago," she said. Then she smiled, just slightly. "Or maybe today was exactly when I was supposed to do it." The board resolution removing Kathleen Whitford from her position at Crestmont Luxury Properties was drafted by Marigold Capital Partners General Counsel that evening. It was circulated to the Heritage Residential Group Board the following morning. It was ratified by unanimous written consent by noon. By 2 in the afternoon on Wednesday, Kathleen Whitford had been formally terminated from Crestmont Luxury Properties for cause, with her termination tied to a documented pattern of discriminatory conduct toward prospective buyers, a pattern that, once Marigold's compliance team began pulling the files, turned out to extend across at least 9 months and to involve at least 11 prior incidents that had been quietly buried by Kathleen's team lead. The team lead was placed on administrative leave the same afternoon. Kathleen received the news in a phone call from Heritage's Chief Human Resources Officer at 2:17 on Wednesday afternoon. She was sitting at her desk in the Crestmont Beverly Hills office at the time. She was asked to surrender her access badge, gather her personal items, and vacate the premises within the hour. She did. She drove home in a silence she did not break for the rest of the day. Within 72 hours, the story had leaked to a real estate trade publication, and within a week, it had been picked up by the Los Angeles Times. Kathleen's name became, briefly but durably, a cautionary case study in luxury real estate continuing education programs. She did not return to the industry. Sophia Reyes, by contrast, did. The commission cleared her account on the 17th day after the showing. She paid off her mother's mortgage that same week. She paid off her own student loans. She set aside a substantial reserve for taxes. And then, on a Thursday morning in early autumn, she received a phone call from a number she did not recognize. It was Olivia Bennett. "Sophia, I would like to talk with you about what comes next." The phone call lasted 47 minutes. Sophia took it standing at the small kitchen counter of the apartment she still rented in Mid-City, the same apartment she had been living in when she had first earned her real estate license, the same apartment where her mother had taken her out to dinner the night the license arrived in the mail and had told her, over a shared plate of carne asada at a restaurant in Boyle Heights, that she was the proudest mother in the city of Los Angeles. Sophia had not yet moved out of that apartment. She had been planning to, but slowly, the way her mother had taught her to do everything that mattered. Slowly, with a savings account, with a plan, with the patience of someone who understood that windfall money was not the same as built money, and that the surest way to lose a windfall was to start spending it like it had been earned over decades rather than minutes. Olivia Bennett, on the phone, did not waste any of those 47 minutes on small talk. She walked Sophia through what she had been thinking about since the morning of the showing. She told her that Marigold Capital Partners would be funding, with an initial capitalization of $15 million, a new program called the Reyes Initiative, named in honor of Sophia, designed to recruit, train, mentor, and place Black and Latino real estate agents into luxury brokerages across Los Angeles, Orange County, San Diego, and the Bay Area. The program would provide tuition for licensing courses, paid apprenticeships, mentorship from senior agents at brokerages within the Heritage portfolio, marketing budgets for first-year agents, and a guaranteed pipeline of qualified buyer leads sourced through Marigold's network of high-net-worth limited partners. Olivia had already retained an executive recruiter to begin staffing the program's leadership. She wanted Sophia, when she was ready, to consider serving on the program's advisory board. Sophia listened. She did not interrupt. She wrote on a yellow legal pad with a pen that was running low on ink. When Olivia finished, Sophia took a long breath, and then she said, in a voice that contained considerably more steadiness than she had expected to be able to summon, "Mrs. Bennett, I would be honored. And I would also like to ask whether the program could include a specific track for first-generation agents, because I think there is a particular kind of mentorship that is needed for people who are entering this industry without anyone in their family who has ever sold a house before." Olivia smiled on her end of the line. She had been hoping Sophia would say something exactly like that. "Sophia," she said, "you are going to be a very good board member." The Reyes Initiative launched 11 weeks later. Its inaugural class enrolled 42 new agents. Within 3 years, the program had expanded to 4 states, had placed over 300 agents into licensed positions, and had generated, through the cumulative transactions of those agents, over $400 million in commission revenue for previously underrepresented professionals in the luxury real estate sector. Sophia Reyes, by the 3rd anniversary of the program, had been promoted to senior agent at Crestmont Luxury Properties, had built her own team of 6 junior agents, and had personally closed $78 million in transactions in the prior year. She still lived in Los Angeles. She had, however, finally moved out of the apartment in Mid-City. She had purchased a small but beautiful home in View Park for her mother, and a slightly larger home in Baldwin Vista for herself, paying cash for both. The Bennetts moved into the Stradella property 14 days after the closing, exactly as planned. They lived there quietly. They threw a single housewarming dinner, attended by 40 close friends and family members, including Sophia and her mother. Anthony grilled. Olivia made her grandmother's macaroni and cheese. The Murano chandelier glowed above them all, and no one mentioned, that evening, the morning the house had been purchased, because the morning had already done all the work it needed to do. Kathleen Whitford, in the years that followed, attempted twice to re-enter the real estate industry under a different brokerage. Both attempts failed. Her name had been documented, in the Marigold compliance file, in a way that any thorough background check would surface. She eventually relocated to Scottsdale, Arizona, where she took a position at a property management company handling rental units. She is, as of the most recent available reporting, still employed there. She does not give interviews. The story of the morning at the Stradella property circulated, in its various retellings, throughout the Los Angeles luxury real estate community for years. It became, in time, a kind of teaching parable. The lesson, in every retelling, was the same. Treat every person who walks through the door of a property as though they may, in fact, be the person who owns the company you work for. Because sometimes they are. If this story moved you tonight, do me one favor before you scroll away. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Drop a comment below and tell us about a moment when you, or someone you love, was underestimated in a room you had every right to be in. We read every single comment. We will see you in the next story. Peace.